Hello, friends, and welcome to Season 2 of The Membership. Just a quick note here before we get started. First of all, we want to thank all of you, our listeners, for the support you showed us during Season 1. From the in-person comments we received at the recording of our live first episode, to all of your kind and thoughtful iTunes reviews, social media posts, and emails, the amount of support our fellow members have given us has been wonderful. It's this support that inspires us to continue our work and to want to make the podcast even better in Season 2 and beyond. And we're hoping some of you can help us. While we certainly understand that not all of our fellow members will be able to support us financially, we'd like to ask those of you who are to consider making a monthly donation through Patreon at patreon.com/membershippod. Your donations will go toward covering the costs associated with the podcast, including website hosting fees, recording equipment, editing help, and travel costs for future interview episodes. And any amount that you can afford to donate will be a huge help, even if it's just $1 a month. All monthly patrons at the $1 a month level or above will be invited to a private Facebook group where we'll post special updates about upcoming episodes, bonus content, and even share unedited episodes and interviews. So go to patreon.com/membershippod to pitch in today.
Hello, friends, and welcome to Season 2, Episode 2 of The Membership. This is John Pattison, and today I'm very excited to share with you an interview I did over the summer with David Kline. David Kline is an Amish farmer and writer. He's the editor of Farming Magazine and the author of several books, most recently The Round of a Country Year. You may remember David Kline and his family if you ever read Barbara Kingsolver's book Animal Vegetable Miracle. And Kline is also a close personal friend of Wendell Berry. He is mentioned throughout Berry's writing in his nonfiction as well as his poetry. In one poem, Amish Economy comes immediately to mind. There, Berry writes, "We live by mercy if we live. To that we have no fit reply, but working well and giving thanks, loving God, loving one another, to keep creation's neighborhood." And my friend David Kline told me, "It falls strangely on Amish ears, this talk of how you find yourself. We Amish, after all, don't try to find ourselves. We try to lose ourselves, and thus are lost within the found world of sunlight and rain, where fields are green and then are ripe, and the people eat together by the charity of God, who is kind even to those who give no thanks." Mr. Kline graciously welcomed me into his home in Holmes County, Ohio. We recorded the podcast at his dining room table, and we were joined by David's son, Mike. Mike hosts a podcast of his own. It's one of my favorites. It's called Back to the Roots. You can find a link to that in the show notes. After our interview, David and his wife, Elsie, invited me to stay for lunch. Elsie has published a cookbook of wonderful Amish recipes, and so I'll let you imagine just how delicious the food was. Over lunch, we talked about food and farming and books and baseball and theology. And that lunch, as well as the interview with David and Mike Kline, will be cherished memories for me. I hope you enjoy the interview. Thanks for listening. So I'm here and I'm joined by David Kline and his son Mike Kline. Thank you both for being here. This is a real honor for me, actually. I've read your books. I subscribe to the magazine that we'll talk about, and so just being able to follow your work for a long time and then to actually be sitting in your dining room is a real treat for me. One of the questions that we ask, actually the question that we ask all of our guests on the podcast is what is your Wendell Berry origin story? We had fun asking Mary Berry that question. she had the most unique. Only a couple people can have the same origin story that she had. But so I'm curious, when did you first meet Wendell Berry?
I would say 1983, 82 or 83. we had a beekeeper, a bee inspector. I started beekeeping in 1974, and he was. We were sitting and talking. He said, "You need to read Wendell Berry's book, The Unsettling of America." And I sent for it, and also The Gift of Good Land, which was a collection of his essays. Mm-hmm. And then I think this beekeeper told me Wendell Berry will be speaking at Oberlin College. That was some years later, and I decided to go. My wife and I, Elsie and I, went. And we listened, and I think the topic of his lecture or talk was people, land, and community. Mm. And then afterward, we left, and they had a little reception. We got to the edge of town, and I really would have liked to go to that reception, but I felt uncomfortable. Elsie said, "Go back. You'll never forgive yourself if you don't." So we went back and had this wonderful conversation with Wendell Berry. And then I'm not saying, maybe 1982, 83, there was a draft horse tour through this community with Morris Tillene from the Draft Horse Journal. Wes Jackson was along, and his son Scott, Wendell Berry, and Den were along, and they stopped at our farm here. And you probably remember that a little bit, Michael.
A little bit.
And then from there on, we've always been in contact. We exchange ideas and information. We see each other, probably not every year, but quite often. Mm-hmm. All these years we've been friends. Of course, there was Gene Loxton, mm-hmm. and Morris Tillene and Wes Jackson, sort of the five of us that were bouncing ideas around.
Was it Mike, in your podcast, I feel like somebody described you as like the Five Horsemen or something. Was it in your podcast? Yeah.
The apocalypse. Yeah.
The ag apocalypse, maybe. Yeah,
the ag apocalypse. Wendell Berry's just been a real good friend to our family, and Tanya and their children, Dan and Mary, and the grandchildren.
Mm-hmm. So you had I was going to ask if you had read some of his work ahead of time, and it sounds like you'd read one or two books.
I had read. Mm-hmm. I remember reading The Unsettling of America. I had so many questions. I was drafted during the Vietnam War and worked in a hospital in Cleveland as a conscientious objector for 2 years. And I would ask many questions, not just on farming, but, our religion as Amish. Are we simply just a plain Protestant church? It doesn't really make much sense. And because if we separate our faith from our actions totally. But I also had a lot of questions on farming. Why do we farm the way we do? And Wendell Berry answered me those questions very, very ably. One was his essays, I had been reading Wendell Berry in the Organic Farming and Gardening magazine. He would write some in there, so the name wasn't totally unfamiliar to me. But once I read The Unsettling of America, I remember reading it at night and underlining it, and waking my wife and reading portions to her, and I said, "Listen to this. This now makes sense. Why we farm the way we do."
Yes. Yeah.
To preserve the small farms, preserve the communities, and Wendell Berry helped me tremendously.
Mm-hmm. My experience reading Berry's work has been that he, not only do I learn a lot, but there have been innumerable times where I feel like he puts into words what I was already feeling and hoping, and articulating it better than I could have myself, and giving me some language and connecting what I'm feeling to other communities across distance and across time, and that's been really, really wonderful. There's obviously a lot of resonance between how Berry writes about agriculture, what Berry believes about agriculture and practices, and how the Amish have historically practiced agriculture. And so, what do you think some of those places of resonance are?
It would be, I would say, on the scale we farm and on the diversity of it, is that we have never looked at agriculture as drudgery. That was probably, Wendell never, and it's, as Wendell once told me, there are two words I don't like. One is inevitable, and the other is efficiency and inevitable. Is that For instance, in our small-scale conventional dairy farmers we're losing them because of technology that was never considered good or evil, and that is sex semen. And that allows the huge dairies just to add cow numbers, all they need, and the small farmer has no chance. Mm-hmm. Even though he can use sex semen too, we won't help him. He doesn't have the scale. So that we just have wonderful conversations on things, and Wendell has this great sense of humor that we laugh a lot.
Well, I started laughing a moment ago when you mentioned drudgery, because in your most recent book, which we'll talk about again in a little bit, The Round of a Country Year, it's comprised of a series of journal entries that tell the life of a 1 year here on your farm. And when I was writing about it for my website, I actually wrote about it in terms of drudgery. And I said that it seemed like there's very little of what I would describe as drudgery. And I said that certainly I would imagine that there are tasks here on the farm that you don't enjoy, but my impression is that you and your family are farming at a scale that makes even those chores short-lived. And then this is an exact quote from what I wrote. I said, "Can drudgery endure when you love your work and the place where you do it? When you are pursuing an ideal of flourishing that takes into account health and wholeness and holiness and beauty, and when your work from one day to the next is varied and done in collaboration with neighbors and friends and nature." And when I wrote that, I did not know that I would have a chance to someday interview you, and so I was going to ask, and I had this question written down: was my impression about drudgery correct?
It was correct, because it depends on the way you look at it. My dad, I never ever remember him saying, "Oh, I wish we wouldn't have to do this." There was no drudgery in his life at all. But when he was dying, he admitted to me he wasn't really fond of shocking wheat. We'd still cut it with a binder and shock because it was scratchy. But he did it. He never complained. It was only a one-day job. 1 day out of 365. That's not drudgery. And you have to help with the family, and occasionally neighbors come in and help. And it was, I remember one time we were shocking wheat, and we came up over the hill, and there were the neighbors coming from the back end of the field, and one of the girls said, "No, wow, this is life." Yeah. And it all depends on the way you look at it. And we have, sure, there are things that are might be considered drudgerous, but not really. It's not really. We always say it's worse than sweeping down spider webs, but even that isn't too bad. It's just a couple hours out of the year.
Yeah.
But I think when I was growing up, I had a list of things that I needed to do chores every day, and Grandpa told me, pick the one you like the least and do that one first. Never leave that till last, because it will get worse and worse as the tasks are completed ahead of it. I've never forgotten that one.
Yeah. And just do it and get it behind you.
Yeah. Can you describe your farm here?
We have 120 acres that belongs to. It was bought by my grandfather 101 years ago. Wow. That was last year in 1918, right after just before the end of World War One, which was that ended in November 1918. And he bought it at sheriff's sale. The family hadn't paid taxes for about 10 years. He bought it, and the price was fairly high, 160 acres. The farm was then split. It was 160 acres for $13,800, which was quite a bit of money in 1918. Of course, then the Depression came and prices dropped on it. But it's been in our family ever since, and in all those years, we have never depended on off-farm income. So it has provided for the family for 101 years now. Wow. My uncle lived on it the first year, and I was just telling somebody yesterday that one of the first years he trapped enough muskrats here in the creek to pay for the taxes. So the taxes must have been fairly low, but it was it's been a good place to live. I grew up on it. Mike grew up. Our family grew up on it. Walked to the same school. It was public school until 1960. And then it became, the state decided one room schoolhouse will not give us adequate education, so they wanted to bus us. It's interesting, and I think in 1974, it was 1972, the Yoder versus Wisconsin case in Wisconsin came to the U.S. Supreme Court, and it was that we have to go to the age of 16 or through high school, and it was decided we through 8 years and the age of 14, because of Harry Blackman and Warren Burger were both from Minnesota, and they both attended one-room country schools, and they saw the value of it, and so it was ruled in our favor because of those two wonderful men.
Listening to, I'm going to recommend to listeners probably a couple times that they check out the Back to the Roots podcast and start with episode 1, which was an interview that Mike and his co-host did with you, David. I've read several books about the Amish. I've read your books. I learned a lot from episode 1 that I didn't know. But there are a couple questions that maybe are going to be repeats, because I think it provides some helpful background for our listeners who may not know much about the Amish people. Can you give us an overview of sort of the origins of the Amish in Switzerland, and then how they immigrated to the United States?
The Amish we say we're a part of the Protestant Reformation, which we are proud in a sense. Goes back to about 1525, and then we're all Swiss because of religious persecution in Switzerland from the state church, which was Reformed, and also the Catholic Church. Our ancestors then left, starting about after the 30 Years' War and the Treaty of Westphalia in 1649. They started moving north into the Alsace areas of Germany on the invitation of the lords and the princes who owned large estates and needed workers. So they moved north there. And it's also interesting, in about 70 years, they dropped their Swiss dialect and picked up the Alsatian dialect, which is now basically Pennsylvania Dutch. And from there, they rented land, and that's where our rotations that we basically follow in America, what we call the 4 or 5 year rotation of small grain like oats, plowed in September, planted the wheat that fall. Then the wheat you sow timothy with the wheat in the fall, and then in the spring and March, sometimes overseeded with a legume, clover and alfalfa. And then when the wheat was harvested, that became a hay field, and then the following year it was hay, and then maybe 2 years hay, and then you spread the barn manure on that field, and it was plowed for corn. So its highest fertility was for the corn, and then the corn was then followed by oats, and this practice is going on for a century more.
And so the farming practices that the Amish are known for now essentially were developed
in Alsace,
and then brought here,
right? And then that's also where they started growing clover. The Anabaptists, the Amish are part of the Anabaptists, Mennonites, Hutterites in Amish, and they started growing legumes there. And the legumes get their nitrogen out of the air free, and this started to increase the fertility of the land, and they became very prosperous farmers. Of course, most of them couldn't own their land, but they brought those practices to America on the invitation of William Penn, the Quakers. We owe a tremendous debt to the Quakers because William Penn knew of the persecution. He invited them to come into Pennsylvania. And then from Pennsylvania in about even in the late 1720s up through what we call the first immigration. It was really not second. The immigration was interrupted by the American Revolution, and also the close of the European ports at that time. So from about 1780, I'm just guessing here a little bit, to around 1800, there were very few people coming over. And then we are from the second immigration, starting about 1800, came to Pennsylvania and then to Ohio in 1808, to Indiana in about, I'm guessing here a little about 1825, Illinois, and then Iowa in 1849. So and it's interesting to me always that the Amish came in, and the Mennonites basically went out through the Midwest. They didn't want to have it. Well, of course, New England with the Puritans, they had a tremendous religious intolerance. So they'd go to New England, and they'd go to the southern states because of slavery. The Anabaptists already felt in the 1600s it's wrong for one human to own another human. So it went through the Midwest and it happened to be the best farmland in the United States. So they flourished. And then I didn't quite finish that question on our farm. Like we have 120 acres, and we used to milk about 25 cows when Mike was home, maybe a few more. But we set the 4-year rotation. But eventually, as the layer market, the egg market dropped out, especially hogs dropped out, it came down to mostly dairy. And now, of course, with Organic Valley, the herd sizes increased. So that rotation is sort of interrupted with more grass. Mm-hmm. And of course, some are all grass now. But it's I still think that 4 or 5 year rotation is just, you can control weeds, you can establish new hay seeds. I think it's still, if livestock is our income here. And so we need to go where we can make a living. Mm-hmm. And right now it's organic dairy and some sheep, but not everybody's a sheep man. But dairy is just really nice, really nice. So and now our daughter and son-in-law they're doing the farming. I help wherever I can, especially with the hay, mowing hay, and I do the corn cultivating, which to me is one of the most enjoyable jobs in the world. With 2 rows of cultivating, 3 horses, 75-degree day, life doesn't get better.
Something else I learned from Mike's podcast is that, maybe contrary to popular conception, not all Amish are farmers. In fact, far from it.
Far from it anymore. I think we have every 5 years we come out with what's called an Ohio Amish directory, which has all the churches, all the families, all the children, all their ages, their spouses, everything listed. And of course our work we do. And I think in 1975, there were like 70 to 75% of the people were farmers or retired farmers, and that's probably down to 10-15%. Because as our population doubles
from 75% to 10 to 15%.
Yeah, it's not that there are fewer farmers, there's so many more people. Our population doubles every 17 and a half years. Mm-hmm. So we have a very fast growing population, so we just have so many people, and there's a limited number of acres available. Yeah. Our community is spreading down into the county south of us. It's hill country. A lot of opportunity to live, not the nicest farms, but they can still have small acreage. They can have their own milk cow and things like that. And he might have a job somewhere in construction, or maybe has a cabinet shop. Okay. But still gives a lot of opportunity to move down there.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned Organic Valley. Mike, can you talk about your work with Organic Valley? Maybe give listeners an overview of what the co-op is and what your role is for the co-op?
Sure. Well, Organic Valley was founded in 1988 by 7 farmers in rural Wisconsin. And it's now grown where we're nationwide. We also have beef members in Australia and dairy members in England under the OMSCO Organic Co-op. So I work in Central Ohio, right in Amish country here. I've been with them for almost 8 years. I kind of lucked into it, I guess. I was out of agriculture from about 21 up until 8 years ago. So I was in forestry and had the opportunity to be kind of the field rep for the farmers here. So I'm kind of the conduit between the farmers and the co-op, and it's a really rewarding job. You try to help farmers transition to organics, help them through the pitfalls, and connect them with farmers who are doing something unique that might work. So my job is never the same 2 days in a row.
No drudgery?
No drudgery. It's just, it's a really rewarding thing to do, to work. I have 110 farms, or approximately. We've had a lot of farmers actually leave this area and move their dairies to New York for cheaper land prices, because land is anywhere from, that land just a mile from my house sold at $35,000 an acre the other day, and they felt it was really cheap. So they're families that want the kids want to farm are leaving the area to find cheaper land so they can give their kids a chance. So my day-to-day thing is just going out seeing farmers. We do a lot of animal husbandry on farms to make sure that the animals are taken care of. That falls under my category of what I do. So it's kind of it's a wide-ranging job. The easiest way to explain it is I'm the field rep for Organic Valley to the farmer.
Yeah. There are a lot of pressures maybe on all dairy farmers, but it seems like especially the non-organic dairy farmers, it just feels like they're kind of, I don't know, like from a non-professional standpoint, it seems like they're being taken advantage of. But maybe that's not the right way of putting it. But from as a loyal listener to your podcast, I'm hearing stories about farmers who are transitioning to organics, which is better for the animals, better for the land, better for the consumer, and better for the farmer themselves, right? Mm-hmm. Can you talk about like what some of those benefits are, like of transitioning? Maybe talk about transitioning to organic, but then maybe why our listeners should be preferring organic, especially Organic Valley.
I think when you look at, because right now we are not adding new farmers to Organic Valley, and there's a long list of farmers in this region who have transitioned their land to organics, but there's no organic milk market available because the organic milk market is saturated, same as the conventional market is right now. Mm-hmm. And that has a lot to do with market conditions. Plant-based beverages are being a huge push to get away from dairy. I would love to say that farmers transition to organics because they believe in the organic systems plan. But in reality it boils down to money in the beginning. They're trying to keep their farms afloat, and you can be more profitable and make a living easier in organics. So what I've seen is these farmers transition, hoping to be viable enough, have enough money that the kids take an interest and continue the farm. Once they're organic for 3 to 5 years, how that mindset changes is really rewarding. Mm. And when you look at the organic dairy in general has to get 30% of the dry matter needs for the cow. Their feed has to come from pasture through the grazing season. So then on our farmers that don't feed any grain, that is a 60% of their diet has to be grass during the grazing season. And the higher the forage levels intake on the cow is, the higher your omega-3s and lower your omega-6 fatty acids are. So just from a health perspective, it is healthier. I mean, the tests have proven. Washington State did a study on all the different kinds of milk with the omega-6 to omega-3 ratios. The average American diet, I believe, is around 40 to 1 omega-6 to omega-3, and the perfect diet is 1 to 1.
Wow.
So
that's incredible.
So, and our grass milk is actually a 1 to 1 ratio, where the rest of our milk, I think, is between a 3 and a 4 to 1 omega-6 to omega-3, where the higher grain levels you feed, the higher your omega-6s are because it's an acidic starch feed. But with all that being said, organics, I think, is healthier for the consumer because it starts at the soil. You've got to work with your soil. You get healthy soil, healthy feed, healthy milk from the animal, and getting them outside on grass. I know pretty much every milk brand out there, their label has a cow on grass. Yeah. And a lot of those cows only see grass if they look through a window. Yeah. So I think, obviously I'm biased because I work for Organic Valley and I work in the organic industry. But what's exciting to me is how many farms we transition in this area to the next generation. And whenever we transition, like the farm here, Dad was transitioned to Kevin and Ann. When you see that transition happen, that means something on that farm was viable enough, because you won't be a farmer if you can't make a living doing it. So we see a lot, very, very few farms actually sell cows here and there's nobody to take over. It does happen on the organic side. So I'm really hoping the organic marketplace grows because there's a list of 40 plus farms in the area that are looking for an organic milk market.
Yeah.
Still, the best way to save the small farm is to make it profitable.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about this because you've written about what it would take to bring the next generation into farming, and you've described it, I believe, as almost like romancing. Like you have to woo them.
Right, and it's we can only farm so long for the fun of it. It boils down to profit. Mm-hmm. We have to make a profit that equal to what they can at least do with hourly wages and more. So that's why in 1997 we had a meeting here in our farm shop with how many farmers were there? Probably 20. And what can we do to value add to our product? And we decided to go organic. We were already, I was thinking organic for years, but we didn't have a market. And there was only one farmer at that time ready to certify, and that would have been Mark Martin. But he was just a young farmer. But about 8 of us decided to go for it. And, there was this fairly large wait-and-see group, and there was a huge wait-and-see. This is probably not going to work. But most of those are on. So it can work, and it does work. And it's not just a product you sell. I always say, we want a healthy product here on the farm. In our 51 years of marriage, my wife have never bought milk. We've never bought meat chicken. And we've never bought eggs. We've always had them on the farm. So if we want good food, I think whoever buys that should also have the same opportunity we have to have the very best food available. And it's also the farm is, if you look at the farm, the butterflies, the monarchs, even though the milkweeds are organic, and everything, it's just a good feeling. Mm-hmm. And when we do go to a store, for instance, Rody's in Millersburg is a supermarket that has a nice selection of organic products, I never look at the price. Mm-hmm. Somebody worked hard to make that organic product available to me, and I'm so happy to pay him for it.
Yep. I'm glad you mentioned the diversity here on the farm, because that's something that really came through so beautifully in the Round of a Country year. Not only the diversity, the variedness of your work, but just the diverse non-human community on your farm. The bees and the dragonflies, all different kinds of birds, and your other books you talk about that too. Letters from Lark Song and Scratching the Woodchuck. You're talking about they're your neighbors.
Yeah.
They share your
place on Earth.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And I was just so struck by that, and I will just say to the listeners that reading the Round of a Country year changed the way how I pay attention to my own place. We got a rain gauge. You were talking about the rain. We got a rain gauge, put it right outside our sliding back door, and my daughters and I check it in the morning and dump it out. My 5-year-old loves to dump it out and start over again. We put up bird feeders. And we start, for the first time ever, we are now keeping a bird list of birds that we see both on our property and when we're out and about. We got a pair of binoculars so we can watch close up. And these are birds that were always there, but we just never noticed. We don't get many monarchs where we are, but my 11-year-old planted a monarch garden this year. Because who knows, just in case. Because I loved reading about the Monarch Rescue Squad that you do with your grandkids, right? Can you explain what that is and why that's important?
Well, we have one granddaughter, Tim Steamy, that she goes out, she can spot the smallest monarch larvae I've ever seen anybody, just like the end of a needle. And she finds those, and if for instance along roadsides, when the township is ready to mow along the roads, or if they have a hay field with some milkweeds in it, she'll go and rescue those monarchs and bring them in and gives them new leaves every day, and then until they pupate into a chrysalid, and then they hatch and fly away. And with last year we planted some tropical milkweed. I hope it's not a weed, but we had a patch back here in the garden, maybe 8 feet around. We had a lot of milkweed, And I stood there and counted 50 monarch larvae on that. And it's just, and there were chrysalids everywhere on the house siding, in the greenhouse, they were everywhere. They crawl out and then they spin. So last year was an excellent monarch year.
Wonderful.
I hope this year, I saw the first one May 19th, which was early. And the milkweeds are just now starting to grow, and of course everybody's mowing, the roadsides are mowing, and the townships think it's a great idea to get everything manicured, but it's not very monarch friendly to do it. But we let them, and I notice more and more people when they mow along the roadsides, they do not mow the monarch, the milkweeds, the milkweeds. But like I said, our granddaughter is she just rescues a lot of them.
Yeah, and not long after finishing your book, I read a story about the monarch migration in California last year, and I can't remember the exact percentage, but it had a huge dip from the year before, and so folks are panicking. Right? I think probably rightly so. And saying this is something we really have to do something about.
We do it here. I guess ours fly to Mexico, near Mexico City, to Sierra Madre Mountains, and in October, you see on a fairly stiff southwest wind, there's a monarch struggling, flying. He's got 2,000 more miles to go. It just freaks me out. Will he make it or not? I always wish him Godspeed.
Yeah.
But it is. I didn't read anywhere whether our population. It used to be 40 acres of monarchs overwintering. And that dropped down to 2 acres at its worst, and then it went up to 10 acres again. So my expectations are last winter was they had more, and I hope so. The monarch is such a beautiful creature, and it's so school children can take in the larva and they can watch him pupate into a chrysalid and hatch out as a beautiful adult and tan his wings and fly away.
Your book was written as a series of journal entries, and I was curious reading it because journaling is such an important part of my spiritual practice, just even understanding what I think about something. I kind of slipped from journaling into prayer and back again. It's very, very important to me. Reading this, I wondered, is journaling something that you always do? And is that something that you used to sort of help you keep track of sort of the rhythms of the farm from one season to the next and from one year to the next?
It does. I must say, I hardly ever go back through them on a yearly basis. I do. I started when I was drafted and lived in Cleveland for 2 years. I started, always kept a little diary, just plowed, hauled manure, things like that. It's very, very short entries. But then when I lived in Cleveland, the city was such an interesting place. So I started writing full pages. And then eventually I went just to spiral notebooks. So you're restricted to one page. You can write 4 pages if you want to, or you can skip a day. And I have skipped years. And then I start again.
This is my first time in, I'm certainly in Holmes County, but I don't know if Amish country, I don't know if that's the right way of describing it. But.
Well, everybody calls it that.
Okay. And this is nice. I don't know if we should wait and just kind of let this
wait.
thing.
Amazing Grace.
Yeah.
We were just talking about Grace, weren't we?
Yeah, that's beautiful.
We had a visitor here at every summer we have a family farm field day, and an editor from Nova Scotia, Dirk Van Loon, came down here. He came into Akron Canyon Airport, rented a car, and was coming down through Kittredge, and he met an Amish girl with an open bucky, and it was a beautiful day, a beautiful early July day, and she was a nice horse, and she gave this nice smile and wave, and he just pulled off to the side of the road and got us out of his little book, like all journalists carry, it's Style and Grace.
Yes. Yep. Coming in today, like seeing sort of the first buggy, and then another one right after that, and all these folks walking along the road. I thought it was, gosh, I don't want to exaggerate, but it felt like reverential. I just slowed down how fast I could have been driving or had been driving. I wanted to wave to the folks who were going past me. Part of what I'm doing on this trip is I'm visiting all of these neighborhoods where churches are really rooting themselves in their neighborhoods. And I talk about the value of loving your place and walking your neighborhood. And that's what was going on out there.
I always said, in the spring, the sun moves north about 70 miles a day. And when I was plowing with a walking plow, I walked about 17 miles a day. I always felt that's just the right pace, 17 miles a day. So everything is in here. Sunday mornings when we go to church, we visit a neighboring church. We may leave here at 7 o'clock. We travel 5, 6, 7 miles. Almost no traffic. You probably won't even pass a single car because all businesses closed in East Holmes. And all our little villages, Berlin, Farmerstown, Mount Hope, Walnut Creek, Weinsberg, and Kittredge have no town council, no mayor, and no cop. The only place in the United States that is.
Yeah.
Because everything we still honor the Sabbath.
Which is gets.
And we have no alcohol, which helps.
You talked in the round of a country year. Well, it's what part of what comes through is this rhythm of life that includes time for rest in the evenings. Maybe only doing a half day's work on Saturday, kind of like things around.
My dad always liked to slow down Saturday evening. Unless we had hay or something really urgent, he would slow down. And I practiced that. Mike practiced it. Tim practiced it. Our sons-in-law like it. It's to slow down and prepare yourself for the Sabbath, for Sunday. And it's because it's a day of rest. It's a day of reverence, and it's a day of refreshing. Because the body needs rest and the spirit needs rest. I remember reading in the budget once, that's our sort of weekly Amish Facebook. We had of this man spoke about his dad was a bishop down in the Big Valley in Pennsylvania. He says Sunday afternoons he'd come and we serve a noon meal in church. This is interesting to you. You're a believer. And I said, every day, this community eats about 2 tons of cheese every Sunday. Look at the support we give to the dairy farmers. And we have a noon meal. But then he said his dad would come home and sit on the porch and just look out over the valley. He said he didn't read or anything. He was just meditating. And then he went on to say, sometimes we're so busy serving the Lord, we don't have time to worship him. Mm-hmm. I was probably 14 years old when I read that. I never forgot it. Mm-hmm. That we have to stop and pause and actually worship the Lord.
Mm-hmm. And people need rest. And as you and Barry have both written about, the horses need rest. The land needs rest. I think Barry wrote somewhere that talking about the Amish approach to technology, that one of the benefits of how did he put it? Of not having lights on, working with the horses is that like you have to stop when it's dark, and so you get to rest. The horse gets to rest. I probably butchered that, but
in the same way at noon, we unhitch. The horses need water, especially warm days. Right then, you sit and eat with the family. Yeah. And the horse is such a great regulator of life. Yeah. We traveled to the closest village. Mount Hope is 4 miles away. Simply time-wise and for comfort of the animal, unless we have a doctor, or there's no doctor in Mount Hope. We have to go to Berlin, which is about 78 miles away. So it determines our distance of travel, and it also preserves all the small towns.
Because I think when you look at horse agriculture locally, if you can get some people get custom work done with a tractor, but on a dairy farm, if you could get all the custom work done, but you've got to haul the manure with horses, that's going to create a size and scale limit on what you can do. And there's also nothing that stimulates the local economy more than an Amish dairy farm or an Amish farmer that's profitable. Because they're not buying off Amazon, they're not buying online, they're going to the local hardware, the local implement dealer, they're getting everything local. And it's a great stimulant for the local economy.
Mike mentioned to me a few years ago already that he estimated that Organic Valley added $7 million additional dollars to our community with organic milk. So a lot of that $7 million will be used locally.
And when you say 7 million, do you mean
that was above standard price?
That would have been all the farmers in my area that I cover.
Really?
Would have stimulated approximately $7 million above the conventional
That
price.
is incredible. Well, we've almost been recording for an hour, but there are just two other things I want to make sure that I get to, if that's okay. Your wife has written a cookbook, which I own and which I've cooked out of. I actually live in community. We have 3 families that live in one home, so there are 4 generations. And I'm fortunate to live with my wife. Is just an amazing cook and loves to cook. One of our housemates, a young guy about 25, loves to cook. And so I really don't cook that much, but now, like the last few times I have cooked, I've cooked out of Elsie's cookbook, which is really, really wonderful. And she is also the food writer for Farming Magazine, right?
Actually, she does a lot in Farming Magazine. She just agreed to be called the food editor, which she is. But she does a lot of the other work too. She does a lot of the typing, and we're very much involved together with that. And then Mike's wife, Martha, designs it.
Oh, really? Okay, good. That's great. Yeah,
I taught her how to design it, and the pupil became significantly better than the teacher.
And she, remember, we were, what was it called? Quark?
Quark 5.0, I think,
and then
was our first.
And she then switched to InDesign, I think. And so, but she's very good at it. So we, Elsie and Martha, once we have everything, the editorial content ready, they put it together in a day.
Wow, the whole issue?
Yes.
I used to work on it for a week, and now Martha does it in 10 hours.
Yeah.
I really wish people would see the amount of work that Mom and Dad put into making this magazine happen. It's clearly a labor of love.
It is, and we've never taken any salary for it. So it's 20 years of I said it's not a legal nonprofit, it's just a nonprofit. But that's because we don't pay ourselves, we can keep the advertising rates reasonable, the subscription rates haven't changed in 19 years.
Wow.
Part of it is to get around to it, but it keeps us above water, and that's all we care about.
And the tagline is "People, Land, and Community."
Yeah.
Isn't
Wendell Berry.
Yeah.
Obviously, when we were influenced by Wendell Berry, and then in 1947 there was a farm magazine started called The Farm, high quality paper, and the long articles. Nothing. They had no sort of restrictions, but the farmers loved it because they didn't write down to the farmers. They treated the farmers as if they were intelligent people. Once a salesman for the successful farming came around to my brother and said, "We write at the 4th grade level so farmers can understand it." That is, you pick that up in publication, and that's why the Farm Quarterly was loved by farmers.
It's reading Gene Lawson and Wendell Berry, I see this essay or this article first appeared in such and such farming magazine, and so I feel like the farming publications have been a place where writers who we may know more from books, if we're able to interact with farmers, to visit, to work out their ideas, to get feedback, they do seem very, very important. I'm a subscriber. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No.
I'm a subscriber to Farming Magazine. We don't live on a farm, but we love the writing. We love the we garden, and we love what the magazine has to say about community. We love the food, and not just I keep saying we because my housemate Mike gets it before I do, and he gets up early to go to work, and he usually is reading the magazine over breakfast before he heads off to work. Actually, he works right by Bob's Red Mill.
Okay.
So anyway, it's we don't have we only keep 2 magazines like laying around the house, and that's one of them. Everything else has to go in the closet if we're going to keep it. But we have a stack of farming magazines. I highly recommend it to folks, whether you're a farmer or not.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Thank you. We started out as a magazine with the Voice of Hope for Small Scale Agriculture, and that's why we rented the post office box in Mount Hope. Farming is always so the farmers can be very negative. They said if if there's a cellar full of farmers, what is it called? It's a wine cellar. It's just wine and wine and wine. So we didn't want that, and we didn't want to write as farmers because there was an economist called Peter Drucker. I think it was at Stanford, Austrian immigrant, I think. And my son-in-law was visiting somebody in the hospital, and he picked up the Atlantic Monthly magazine, and he had an article in there. It was comparing the Industrial Revolution with the so-called information revolution we had, or the digital revolution we have today. And he said the Industrial Revolution moved ahead just as fast as this information revolution. And he went on to say in that article that in the United States, science and technology got all the credit. And I have to mention, now that I think of it, Michael mentioned animal husbandry, how he occurs. Wendell said we all suffered when the universities went from the Department of Animal Husbandry to the Department of Animal Science. Is that the word husbandry is such a nice name. It takes in some. But anyhow, this Peter Drucker went on to say that in the United States, all credit was given to the scientists and the technologists and none to the agrarian. And the farmers were called hayseeds, rednecks. You don't have to grovel in the dirt, it's drudgery and all that. Where England did not do that. England gave the status, or a lot more status, to the agrarian. And as of today, England has no schools of technology, like MIT or Case Tech. I never checked it out, but I assume Peter Drucker knew what he was talking about. So it depends on if it's negative, as Wendell I think said, we have siphoned off a lot of the best and brightest out of the American agriculture communities for 150 years.
Yep. Yeah. I do some rural community development work for a big foundation in Oregon, and that is something that we talk about a lot at this foundation, the Ford Family Foundation. You have rural communities where a lot of kids feel like they're that there's no reason for them to stay. Yeah, so after high school they are going to the city, or they're going off to college. And one of the studies that I saw said that the number one predictor of whether or not a young person will come back to their rural community after college or after a career transition is whether they were made to feel part of that community as a child. Like, do they have a voice? Do they feel a sense of ownership and belonging there? And many rural communities don't prioritize that. They're inadvertently, or maybe not inadvertently, but sort of like kicking them out the door. Like, there's nothing for you here. You need to do better than
you can do better by going somewhere and getting a better job, getting a better career than you can do it locally.
And you like hollow out the rural communities.
Right. Just yesterday I visited our family doctor, our family doctor, Dr. Dan's son, Eric. And we were talking. He said, where you went to college and all that. And I said, thanks for coming back to this community. He said, I wouldn't have considered any other.
My 11-year-old daughter just told me the other day that, like, if she wants to live in Silverton, our town, like, for the rest of her life. And I said, if it ends up being that way, like, that would make me very, very happy.
I think Wallace Stegner wrote, people who move so often finally, and this paints such a nice picture of what's happening, is they move and find that their roots are dragging behind them, completely dried out.
Wow. Wow, what an image.
Yeah, what an image of that is. They have no roots anymore.
I'm seeing my oldest son is 23, and his friends who went to college have now graduated. Probably 90% of them are coming back and getting jobs. If they can get it in their field, they're getting them locally. But even some of them are not using the degree, but are coming back.
Or working on the Mason crew.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting that, they think Holmes County, Amish country is kind of boring, not much to do. Yet as they grow older, all of a sudden, kind of cool.
Yeah.
It's kind of an interesting man who left the Amish faith. His dad was Amish, and I just saw him the other day. When they stopped in for a visit, he said, I'd like to be buried in the cemetery where my dad is. So there's always sort of a coming back.
Mm-hmm. And I mentioned earlier the misconception that some folks have about how isolated the Amish are, and I contrast that with folks who are pursuing the American dream and how isolated they make themselves in their houses. They don't know their neighbors. They're not involved in their community, and there's an epidemic of loneliness. Like a former Surgeon General
there is
actually called it an epidemic.
That's good. I heard somebody speak recently. The suicide rates are higher than they've been for a long time, and there's loneliness is what it is, an epidemic of loneliness.
He says that it's the pathology that is behind so many of the other illnesses that he sees coming through his office. Now he's practicing as a doctor again. Loneliness is often there in the background, so much of it.
Yet they probably have a huge amount of social media friends.
Yeah,
but no relationships.
No relationship. Yeah.
There's just a difference between an online friend and a real relationship.
Yeah.
That interaction, the person-to-person interaction, is what builds something.
So like my friend Al, we put in tiles in Rowland's garden trying to drain it out. It's been so wet the last year. So he forgot his shovel. So I brought his shovel along home and cleaned it and sharpened it and oiled it for him and set him out here at the corner house. So he stops in. I was in the bathroom. So I just opened the bathroom window. We visited for half an hour, was to the bathroom window.
Do you want that in the podcast or
edited? I don't care.
I love that.
That's great.
Well, thank you so much. This has been a real treat for me.
Well, thanks for coming.
Yeah. Well, thanks for your work. I really do recommend that people check out the Farming Magazine. You write a column every issue that's the first thing that I read. There are also voices in there that our listeners will recognize, like Wendell Berry, Joel Salatin, and new voices that you'll become familiar with because they write.
We have several new voices came in that had no really market for publishing. For instance, Smith's Girls with Vegetables, very good writers. David Buntrager. Those found their voice in Farming Magazine. I feel if anything, if we've accomplished anything, is we bring those voices out.
Yeah. Well, thank you both for your work, your various types of work. Thank your wife for me for the work that she does for Farming Magazine, and you as well.
Well,
I'm really grateful. That's it for this episode of the membership. Thank you for listening. A couple quick housekeeping notes. In the next episode, which will be Season 2, Episode 3, we will be discussing 2 of Wendell Berry's short stories, A Half Pint of Old Darling and The Lost Bet, both starring Ptolemy Proudfoot, one of our favorite characters here. 2 very wonderful short stories, also quite short. So hopefully you'll be able to read along with us. You can find the show notes for this episode, as well as all of our previous episodes, at our website, membershippod.com. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, all at membershippod. If you're going to buy a book by Wendell Berry, we recommend that you go through the bookstore at the Berry Center, and you can find their new website at berrycenterbookstore.com. We'd also like to remind you that we are a member of the Rabbit Room Podcast Network. You can find more great podcasts at rabbitroom.com/podcasts. And if you want to support the membership, you can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/membershippod. It's a lot of websites to remember. We'll put them all in the show notes so you can find them there. Last favor we have is, if you wouldn't mind leaving a review or rating us on iTunes, that will help our visibility for this podcast and help us reach more listeners. Thanks for listening.